Welcome to the Rochester, New Hampshire History Podcast, a monthly show that will shine a light on a piece of history that has been all but forgotten.
The January 22, 1942 Rochester Courier had more pages than usual, as there was a special supplement that announced the opening of Frisbie Hospital. The new building had 60 beds, a modern maternity unit with 20 bassinets, a children's disability unit, and an X-ray lab. The newspaper reported the following headlines: $300,000 structure, gift of Spaulding families. Pride of the hospital is the operating room, which surgeons declare is the equal of any in the country of comparative size. Each bedroom has been treated by the decorators as a single unit, complete with matching furniture, pastel walls, and overstuffed chairs. Hospital kitchen will arouse feminine envy. Maternity wing, pride of hospital officials. Future new arrivals assured every possible safeguard for making successful debut in life.
This was not the first medical facility in Rochester, nor was it the first one to be named Frisbie. To understand the origin of Frisbie Hospital, one has to go back to the early 1900s. Back then, there was not a hospital in Rochester. If one needed care, then one was sent to other cities, such as Dover or Portsmouth. That changed in 1916, when Eagle Hospital opened in Rochester at 95 Charles Street, with 4 nurses and 10 beds. The hospital was named after nurse Minnie Eagle, who leased the building. By 1918, the Eagle Hospital moved to South Main Street to a bigger building that had 20 beds and 6 nurses. Though the new hospital was competent, it lacked some equipment and was still small. Rochester needed a bigger medical facility, as can be seen by this 1920 newspaper article. Demands on the city hospital already exceeds its facilities. Almost 300 patients cared for in 10 months. Only 9 deaths in that period. Imperative need of maternity ward and nursery. Around this time, the Rochester Hospital Association was formed, and it purchased Eagle Hospital and renamed it to the Rochester Hospital.
By 1922, the association purchased a building on Charles Street, and the hospital moved back to Charles Street. This was a beautiful location, with lots of shade trees, and more importantly, there were now 24 rooms, an operating room, and a sun porch. The city celebrated this new hospital with a parade, circus performances, and a dedication ceremony. Several years later, in 1929, the hospital on Charles Street was renamed. This was done because Dr. Jesse Frisbie, who grew up in Rochester, had left $23,000 in his will to fund a hospital in his hometown of Rochester. His only request be that the institution be named after his son, Frank Frisbie, who had predeceased him. The money was accepted, and the medical facility was renamed as the Frisbie Memorial Hospital.
Around 11 years later, in 1940, the Spaulding family sent a letter to trustees of the hospital. They would donate $200,000 for a new hospital if the community contributed $15,000. Needless to say, their offer was accepted, and the community had no problem raising $15,000. They actually raised over $40,000. Land was quickly purchased on Whitehall Road, and construction started, including the city adding water and sewer lines to Whitehall Road. During this time, there was an attempt to rename the new facility to Spaulding Hospital. According to this February 13, 1941 newspaper, the entire medical staff of the hospital wanted it renamed to Spaulding Hospital, since the Spaulding family had donated so much money for the new building. However, nothing ever came of this, as there were too many legal obstacles to make the name change from Frisbie to Spaulding.
January 25, 1942, the new hospital opened and was ready for business. A few days later, the patients at the old hospital on Charles Street were moved to the new Frisbie Hospital. And since then, decades have passed, and Frisbie Hospital is still on Whitehall Road, but all the changes and additions to the building make it almost unrecognizable from its quaint beginnings way back in 1942. And if you're wondering about the old building on Charles Street, it was eventually put up for sale by the Hospital Association It was advertised as having 29 rooms, lots of bath, elevator, and sprinkler fire protection.
This ends the podcast. If you have any questions or comments, please email bobgriffinpodcast@gmail.com and come back next month for another episode of Rochester, New Hampshire History.